Welcome to the Research Sprint session of the 2022 National Energy Research and Policy Conference. Leading on from that excellent first session, which was a clear scene setter in terms of identifying the scale of the challenge ahead, this session aims to provide a snappy overview of current cutting-edge research in Ireland, addressing societal transformational change. My name is Kerry Sheehan. I'm the head of SEAI's Research and Technology Department, and I'll be a chair for this session. So SEAI has been proudly funding energy research through the National Energy Research Development and Deployment Funding Programme. Some of the projects funded through this programme will be described in the session. Another of SEAI's function is to collate all Irish energy research activity, which can be accessed on our website. We are delighted today to include showcasing some of these projects funded by other national EU research funders. So some housekeeping before we get started, a reminder to use our Q&A function throughout, and I'll pose some of your questions in the Q&A. We'll have two sessions, one in the middle and one at the end of the researcher sprint. So 8 researchers have been set a challenge to highlight in 7 minutes the research gaps they've identified. They'll be how they're seeking to address them and how this work supports policy. It is a challenge, it will be a sprint. We may slip a bit in time, but I will promise you that you'll be at lunch by 1:05. To allow the researchers maximum time to describe their work, I'll provide a very brief overview into them, but please do look at the platform for a more detailed bio. So first up is Dr. Bernadette Power from Cork University Business School on her project Community Engagement in Wind Energy, Innovation Approaches to Achieving a Social License. Over to you, Bernadette.
Morning, everyone, and thank you, Kerry, and to the SEAI for inviting me to present at this event today. I am Dr. Bernadette Power from Cork University Business School and the principal investigator on the SEAI-funded, co-win funded project, which seeks to examine innovative approaches to achieving a social licence for onshore wind energy developments in Ireland. Social acceptance is one of the key barriers to scaling up onshore wind energy. The co-wind project aims to gain a better appreciation of the issues that underpin acceptance of wind energy developments, lifting the hood on innovative approaches to achieving a social licence, such as meaningful community engagement, benefit sharing through community benefit funds, and co-ownership or co-investment. Today, I'm going to present key learnings from the national survey and which was a representative survey of all citizens in Ireland, and preliminary findings from a survey of residents who live within 10 kilometres of the wind farm underneath these headings. I will point to some implications for policy and further research. First, if we focus on a quick assessment of the social licence to operate of community residents within 10 kilometres of an offshore or planned onshore wind farm energy development in Ireland, using an adaptation of Butulier's method to measure social acceptance, we find that there is full trust in only 3% of cases, and in 20% of cases, the social licence to operate is withheld. So focusing on the percentage who would withhold approval, we find it is higher for near neighbours resident within 2 kilometres at 50%, and it also varies depending on whether the development is in planning or operational stage, with the higher percentage of cases withholding the social licence to operate in the planning stage, which is, I suppose, to be expected. When focusing in on engagement, we find that community engagement is the key. It is more important than the benefit sharing mechanisms and co-ownership or co-investment. Citizens who have experience of living near a wind farm prefer early and meaningful engagement, even with scant information. So that's one-to-one, face-to-face, or with community liaison officers. Conditional supporters prefer greater setbacks distance, and one thing to note, it's hard to change the mind of objectors, so it's very important to engage early. Allowing community residents to have a say in decisions relating to the number, size, height, and location of turbines would have a positive impact on acceptance. Community residents have indicated that they're not satisfied with the engagement efforts of developers. And that was 29% said it was very poor. From a policy context then, to scale up developments, the encouragement of meaningful early ongoing engagement is important. Examining setback distances, considering strategies to enable co-design of projects, and to use or expand sustainable energy communities in wind designated areas to assist in changing attitudes to climate change and wind energy are all important. In terms of further research, the focus should still be on the best and most effective ways to engage so that it's not just box ticking. The question also needs to be posed, do we need to equip communities on how to effectively engage with developers and the agenda for societal transformation? And some of those issues came up this morning. And greater research into the benefits of and barriers of co-design projects with a focus on strategies to overcome barriers and enable community engagement in planning, designing, and delivering projects would be helpful. When examining benefit sharing, we find that benefit sharing is important, but it's not a panacea. Household benefits are generally preferred. The governance of the fund is more important, actually, than the sharing of the fund, and local governance is preferred. Current measures for compensating near neighbours, it is felt by residents that they're too low and have little impact on actually increasing acceptance. Community benefits funds help to increase acceptance among residents who live further away from projects, so within 5 to 10 kilometres away. Developing amenities, though, within the 2-kilometre residence has a positive impact on acceptance. So from a policy perspective, to gain acceptance and speed up the transition, there's a number of things mentioned there, but possibly the key one is to look at the balance between compensating those that live very close to the development and providing community funds to the wider community, that this may need to be adjusted. In terms of further research, there is a need for ongoing research in this area to see the effects of community benefit funds once the RES 1 projects become operational. And I suppose this research then can be a benchmark for changes in opinions and preferences and attitudes going forward in this area. Finally, co-ownership and co-investment would increase social acceptance with host communities. We found a strong appetite to invest exists nationally, but that citizens generally prefer to invest low sums of money. Community residents tend to have a preference for co-owned projects or wholly owned projects and for shallower forms of co-ownership, for example, shared revenue models. But that does differ for near neighbours. They do prefer more co-owned or wholly owned projects. There is a low willingness by community residents to volunteer, though, to establish community-owned and co-owned projects. And business knowledge and skills is a barrier to the involvement in community and co-owned projects. These learnings prompt an examination of policy in the following areas. In one sense, to try and immobilize private capital to support the transition, which is needed, but also to increase acceptance of developments. So things like further strengthening of the enabling framework to provide communities with knowledge and skills to establish community-owned and co-owned projects. Strategies need to be considered to ensure that all citizens can invest at some level, rather than relying on volunteers. Hire skilled intermediaries locally to get co-owned projects off the ground, similar to the Scottish model. The evidence also prompts perhaps to broader questions like, do we need to reconsider the definition of a community-owned project? And maybe that's something for discussion. Areas for further research should consider the benefits of education communities on co-ownership, the best use of skilled intermediaries, and whether cases of our best practice in terms of co-ownership and co-investment could lead to a greater momentum in the deployment of wind energy into the future. As you can see, gaining social acceptance is complex. I'll just finish up there. I know it went out, but so as you can see, social acceptance is complex, and I'm happy to address any comments you may have in the chat or later in the Q&A.
Thank you so much, Bernadette, and thank you for sticking to your time challenge. That was very interesting. Okay, swiftly on to our next researcher. We have Dr. Gary Goggins from the Wild Atlantic Nature. It's an EU LIFE project called Integrating Non-Energy Policies to Reduce Household Energy Demands. Thanks, Gary.
Thanks, Kerry. Just remember to unmute myself, which is a help. So yes, that's the title of my presentation, but more particularly, I want to focus on what we would see as a new opportunity to integrate energy policy with agriculture policy to reduce a dependency on the use of peat as a home heating fuel, which is an extremely hot topic, as we know, in Ireland, and something that's never really been addressed. So there may be potential opportunities coming up. So just a bit of background about our project. The project's called Wild Atlantic Nature. It's a LIFE integrated project funded under the EU LIFE programme for nature and environment projects, coordinated by National Parks Wildlife Services under the Department of Housing, Local Government and Heritage, with 9 associated beneficiary partners and a budget of 20 million kind of starting off budget, let's say, but a remit which makes it very interesting to attract complementary funding. So when we see opportunities for additional funding, or when we try something that's working well and we want to target that a bit more, we have this opportunity and in fact a remit to go and attract additional funding to deal with the issues. So the overall big picture of the project is management of the Natura 2000 network, and we've discovered from our research that only 8% of people in Ireland have heard of Natura 2000, but it's our special areas of conservation and our special protection areas, which are designated under the EU Habitats Directive and the EU Birds Directive. So really important areas from an ecological perspective. And I put a picture in the background there of a typical area that we would work in. This is out in Dulac, so very remote parts, you know, generally along the west coast of Ireland, with a specific focus on blanket bog habitat. The project's also a multi-actor project involving the relevant authorities. So the idea behind the project is that all the key decision makers are sitting at the table. So we've got partners including Department of Agriculture, National Parks, Fáilte Ireland, the Heritage Council, etc. So 9 in total. And key for us, we've got about 250,000 hectares of land in the project, but key stakeholders are farmers and landowners, as about 75% of the land is actively farmed and privately owned. So these are the #1 stakeholders for us and the local communities indeed. So the approach, we've heard a lot today about the need to integrate different policies and integrate policy with practice, and that's, I suppose, exactly what we try to do. We look at aligning various land use policies in particular and how they impact on practices and on the local environment. And a point that was well made by Mike Ryan and others earlier is that what we do has to work for the environment, but it also has to work for local communities. And if it doesn't deliver for both of those aspects, then, well, frankly, it won't work and we're wasting our time. We might as well be doing something else. So it's key that we can deliver on those 2 fronts at a minimum. So I just want to focus on one aspect. We've got about 75 actions in our project. It's, you know, a big project. But one thing that we've worked very hard on in the last 2 years is the development of an agri-environment scheme where we pay participating farmers a payment that's directly related to the ecological quality of the land. And that's determined using a scorecard which gives a result of between 0 and 10 for the ecological quality of the land. And it captures things like biodiversity, water quality, flood management, and climate regulation, so your carbon sequestration and storage. And the higher the farmer scores, the higher the payment that they receive. So you reward good quality. If a land is in good condition, the farmer is immediately receiving a good payment. For once, they're getting rewarded for good past management. But if land receives a low score for whatever reason, then we've got this hybrid model where we also provide financial and technical support for farmers to improve the ecological quality of the land. And it's completely voluntary for farmers to do that. So one aspect just to focus on that's captured in the scorecard is turf cutting. If you're cutting peat, cutting turf on your land, and we're not talking about industrial board Namona stuff, you know, we're talking about small scale for domestic use here in general. If you're cutting turf on a piece of land, then you will not score high enough on the scorecard to receive an agri-environment payment. And if you cease that turf cutting, you'll find your score goes up year on year and you'll start to get a payment there. So there is that incentive to shift away from turf cutting. But for us, it's not quite enough. You know, there is the financial incentive, but with the price of oil, gas, etc., and the cultural kind of importance of peat, it's just probably not enough for a lot of people to shift away. So we would see an opportunity for additional incentives here. And so in the results-based, we've been piloting in Northwest Ireland, mostly Mayo, Donegal, Sligo, and we've got 700 farmers in the programme this year who've been working very hard with Department of Agriculture very closely. And this model of results-based payment for ecological quality is going to be a key feature in the next Common Agriculture Policy, where there will be 20,000 farmers in a similar programme across all the mostly uplands and high nature value areas across Ireland. So now we will know exactly on what plots turf is being cut, who's cutting it, etc. And we feel that this is an opportunity to target those people by working with the likes of the SEAI to provide additional incentives to move away from peat through retrofitting, mainly through retrofitting, to reduce the need for turf in the first place. And we floated the idea past some rural development organizations. There's a lot of interest in this. So the idea would be through the results base, and there's 8 local teams that's going to be running cooperation projects through the Common Agriculture Policy in the upland areas from next year. So this idea of communication, building trust, engagement with the right people, that all can be established by working closely with ourselves and with these cooperation project teams through the Common Agriculture Policy. So you can identify households that are suitable for upgrading energy performance to help them move away from peat, by replacing material components that facilitate this type of use, etc. And then the outcomes are multiple as well. So you reduce peat, you reduce carbon emissions, you deliver better quality ecological condition on the ground, also improved air quality indoor, outdoor. Energy poverty would be a significant issue in many of these areas, with the average farm income with farmers in our area would be well below 20,000 euros per year. Many would be on the fuel allowance scheme and that, so they would qualify for good grants for energy improvement, but they would maybe not have the awareness, or they might be afraid of the regulations or the form filling, etc., to go ahead and organize a retrofit for themselves. So we could improve incentives for home energy improvements in rural areas, targeting the right people, and integrate energy issues in existing rural development programs to work with local projects on the ground. And that also integrates different policies. So our land use policy, our energy policy, health policy, social policy. So it's just another opportunity. We've heard a lot today about opportunities for improving engagement, communication, delivering better outcomes by integrating policies and with practices. And here's just another opportunity that I think could be really, really beneficial over the next several years. I don't know if my 7 minutes are up, but I'm done.
They are certainly, Gary, and thank you very much. Next up is my colleague, Jean-Pierre Roux, who will discuss his study on the RES scheme entitled RES Household Payments and Community Benefits Fund. Will it make a difference to community acceptance of wind and solar PV projects? Over to you, JP.
Sorry, hi, can you hear me and can you see my cover slide? Great, okay, 7 minutes on the clock then. So imagine for a moment that you are a policymaker, maybe you're an elected official or you're a senior civil servant in the Department of Energy, and you want the government of Ireland to adopt two policies. Firstly, you wanted to require all renewable electricity generators to make a centrally determined contribution to community benefit funds to support economic development of rural communities close to renewable energy projects or new ones. And secondly, you want to require electricity generators to make direct household payments to so-called neighbors of wind turbines. So let's say every household within 1 kilometer. This scheme will cost you about 234 million euros and will ultimately be funded by Irish electricity consumers. Now, there seems to be a bit of a social agreement of sorts at the moment that it's only fair that rural communities benefit materially from hosting a wind or solar farm in their proverbial backyard. But also, you think that these policies will be instrumental to secure sustained support from neighbors and host communities to host more renewable energy projects into the future. So you managed to convince the Irish government and the EU Director General of Competition that this market intervention will deliver these aims by appealing to some circumstantial evidence, maybe past precedents in Ireland or neighboring jurisdictions. But their approval for this policy comes with some strings attached. In order to have the policy renewed in a few years, you'll have to prove that it has in fact made the intended difference. So how do you prove that centrally mandated largesse has won the necessary social support to stay the course to net zero? So this is one of the policy problems that SEI has been set in this study. And how are we going to do it? Well, firstly, we've maintained a map over the years of every wind turbine location in Ireland. And these include now new turbines built under the RES policy and new solar farms that will be built under RES. And on top of that, we map households that are within 1 kilometer of every new turbine to be built under the RES. So they'll be receiving these household payments once the projects are up and running. And secondly, we map those households within a wider catchment area around wind and solar projects who are likely to see the benefits of the community benefit funds in a few years' time. So once we've done all this mapping, we then do a survey before the RES policies have been implemented, and we do a survey afterwards. And we look at the changes in social support for renewables. Now, of course, as all scientists know, and most people, in fact, social support might vary for a whole bunch of reasons over this period. So we also then match a series of control groups. So these are electoral divisions that match our samples close to RES projects in every demographic sense, but they are not recipients of household payments or community benefit funds because they are much further from RES projects. And we also survey them before and after the RES policy is implemented, and we look at the changes in social acceptance of renewables in those groups. And then the simplified assumption is then if we basically compare these groups over time, although we expect social acceptance to vary within them differently, that the difference in differences will ultimately be attributable to our policy. This will be the effect of the policy. So where we are in this project, in fact, is as of last week, we've just completed our pre-surveys, our pre-treatment surveys. So we surveyed about 1,600 households across Ireland. And although we'll have to wait for several years to complete the study and have robust kind of causal statements that we could make, the initial survey in and of itself gives an interesting snapshot of the current level of social acceptance of wind and solar projects across Ireland. So in the remaining 3 minutes, I will share 3 vignettes that we've learned in the past week from the so-called baseline survey. So the first one is that the expansion of wind and solar PV projects in general enjoy high levels of public support across Ireland, both from people who live close or very close to new projects and those who do not live so close. So we asked respondents to select from one of 4 statements on this. And roughly 3 in 4 people who live within 1 kilometer of a RES project currently under development, many of them, thinks that Ireland has too few wind farms and that more should be built. And roughly about 4 in 5 people living within 1 kilometer of a RES project thinks that Ireland has too few solar farms and that more should be built. When we move from a kind of in principle support to attitudes to a particular project close to people, we find that within 5 kilometers of a RES project, people are most likely to be positive towards that particular project. So here we asked respondents for their attitude to the wind or solar farm being planned or under development close to them in their area. And for our control group, or for those who weren't aware of this, we asked their opinion on a hypothetical project that would be close to them. So these two findings, when taken together, goes, I think, against some of the perceptions you sometimes hear that objections to the deployment of renewables are kind of widespread, or negative attitudes to particular projects are widespread, when in fact we find there's in fact a very large kind of majority of society that supports these. I think we also find, when comparing these slides, that there's a high proportion of the public that support increased deployment of renewables in general, or as a matter of principle, than are positive about the particular project close to their household. And so closing this kind of gap may hopefully be one of the achievements of RES community benefit measures. But obviously, going back to Bernadette's presentation with a more qualitative lens, there's a lot of complexity here that needs to be thought of. The third vignette in closing, I think, links up to that. A third finding of our pre-treatment survey is that reform of the siting process, siting approaches and planning processes may also increase community acceptance of projects. So when we ask respondents to rank different options for encouraging local communities to be more positive about projects in their area, on average, we find that they say the careful selection of sites and early engagement of residents in the planning process were top of their rankings, ranking above near kind of neighbor payments and community benefit funds. So again, this highlights the potential, I guess, good value for money of investing in these areas and updating things like the Renewable Energy Spatial Planning Framework or regional local authority renewable energy strategies. So in closing, whilst we'll have to wait a few years to conduct our second wave survey, post the kind of effects of RES, we will be publishing a detailed report on the results of the baseline survey later this year. So if you're interested in the full report, please keep an eye on SEI Communications. And finally, thanks to the team at Indicon Economic Consultants, Ipsos, and the SEI Research and Technology people who've been helping in this exciting study.
Thanks so much, Jean-Pierre. That was great. And then moving swiftly to our final in the first leg of the sprint is Dr. Noreen Brennan from the J.E. Carnes School of Business in the National University of Galway. And she'll be describing her project, Social Acceptability of Wind Farms and Electricity Export, a Discrete Choice Economic Approach. Thank you, Noreen.
Thanks very much. This is an SEAI funded project that we've been working on in University of Galway for the past number of years. So just to provide a little bit of background. So for Ireland, increased interconnection and the ability to trade in renewable electricity could lessen the potential negative impacts of wind energy intermittency, deliver cost reductions, provide diversification and energy security. Wind energy development in general can face, as we've heard, local opposition due to potentially concerns related to environmental, physical impacts of wind turbines. And projects built specifically for the export of electricity have faced criticism on the basis that all of the benefits of development in the form of reduced electricity prices, decarbonized electricity and enhanced energy security would be received by the importing country, and then with all of the potentially negative externalities being imposed on the exporting country and its local residents. So this project aims to address these issues by attempting to identify the impact of energy exports on wind energy acceptance. So in order to do that, we carried out some focus groups, a national online survey and a face-to-face local survey. So just to provide you with some of the results. So from our local survey of 253 respondents, it was a face-to-face survey across 5 counties in Ireland. And within this survey, we offered respondents a choice experiment, which asked them to select their preferred option for a new hypothetical wind farm that would be built in their area. So this wind farm had various levels of wind turbines, setback distance, and various levels of energy export. So from a 0% export up to 100% export. Within the choice experiment, we offered respondents an electricity discount. So using that, we can measure the effect of increased electricity export on acceptance, see if they require more or less compensation as the level of export increases. What we find is that while respondents do accept, we don't have NIMBYism here, they do accept increased export, but they do require increased compensation as the level of export increases from about 202 at 50% euro in an annual electricity discount to 397 at 100% level. And as has been presented already this morning, experience with local benefits seems to matter. Those respondents who are aware that their local wind farm offers employment or some sort of community benefit fund are more accepting of wind energy, the concept of wind energy export. Following that, we conducted a national survey with over 1,000 members of the public. This was online. In this survey also contained a choice experiment. And in this, we're assessing respondents' attitude to wind energy in general in Ireland, and to see if the general public have positive or negative attributes towards the concept of trade as an intermittency solution. So here, this is slightly different to just a percentage amount of export. Here, one of the solutions to wind energy intermittency was to export excess wind energy when we don't need it and to import energy when we need it. So an increase in trade of electricity. One of the other aspects of the choice experiment, we were looking at whether the general public care that residents living in wind farm development areas are offered some sort of benefit fund. So one of the funds that we offered was a green fund, and this was suggested by a resident or a participant in one of our focus groups. So this is a fund to provide home energy upgrades, funding for solar panels, electric vehicles, and so on for residents living in wind farm development areas. The respondents in the national survey, the majority of them don't live in a wind farm development area and state that there's not likely to be a wind farm built near them. So here we're assessing their preference to know that residents who do live in development areas are provided with a fund. We find that the general public do have positive utility from reductions in intermittency through trade, and they're willing to forego about €388 in an annual electricity discount to support wind energy that reduces intermittency. And they're willing to forego a personal electricity discount of about €460 annually if residents in wind farm development areas are provided with this green fund. However, we do find significant heterogeneity across our sample. Respondents' willingness to accept intermittency reductions, other intermittency reduction options included in the choice set were demand side management and storage. And your willingness to accept intermittency reduction depends on your attitude towards wind energy in general. So if you're more pro wind energy, you're more likely to accept methods of reducing intermittency. And if you're concerned about the infrastructure associated with increased grid expansion or battery storage development, you're less likely to accept intermittency reductions. However, about 94% of the sample derives strong positive utility from a green fund. And I will say as well, about the same amount really value the engagement with, that residents are engaged with a local wind farm. So similar to what we've already said. So in terms of policy implications, I won't go through this chart in detail, but basically what this presents is a combination of both our local and our national willingness to accept. And it's a little simulation of a wind farm being built with 20 turbines, varying setback, quite close setback distance of 1,000 meters, 1,500 meters, and varying the export level at 50 to 100%. So what we find is that the provision of the Green Fund results in positive utility for locals, even at quite close setback distances and at 100% export. And the Green Fund provides the greatest utility for local residents and high utility nationally. So we're suggesting that the provision of something like this could increase the acceptance of wind energy generally in Ireland. And just to note, this data was gathered in 2020, so the utility from the Green Fund is now likely to be higher because of the current energy crisis. And lastly, just in terms of future research requirements, We think it would be useful to gather information on developer attitudes towards engagement and benefit provision, and to assess the wind energy sector's willingness to engage with methods to reduce intermittency. So we actually have a survey out at the minute. So if you would like to complete the survey or know someone that would, do contact me. And the other intermittency solutions we included in the choice set were storage and demand side management. And we find there's a general lack of public awareness about how those methods work and the benefits of these methods. So we think more research in that area would be useful. So that's me, and thank you for your time.
Thank you so much, Noreen. It's very interesting. Okay, we've got 10 minutes for some Q&A. Feel free, any of you, to participate in the questions. I guess what struck me is that all of you mentioned coordinated collaboration is key, whether through multi-actor, co-design, co-ownership, co-development. So how do we ensure that the right participants are in the room? Perhaps Bernadette, would you like to pick that up, or Gary, seeing as your project's an exemplar in this?
Well, I suppose it is important that you have the community members that are near neighbours and close to these projects, engaged with and in the room with co-designing. I suppose what we're finding with developers, they want to say in where these turbines are being located. They want to say in, they want knowledge and to know about the height of them. So that it's it's kind of one-to-one engagement. In other words, that they want to have those detailed conversations to figure out how this is going to be affecting them. So and I suppose it's a matter of, are those conversations happening using a community liaison officer? Are they happening using some form of intermediary? And you're talking about co-designing of projects, and that brings in issues in terms of if communities are actively involved in them, they might also want to have an active share or ownership of them. So you're bringing in, so there's bringing in developers, there's bringing in, in terms of the policies that support in and around that. So you're talking about funders for projects, you're talking about skilled people who can educate the communities as well on developing these types of projects, and helping them in terms of how to engage with developers. And I suppose there's a lot of parties that need to be actually brought to the table to actually bring about, I suppose, what is co-design. And co-design will bring about more acceptance, because communities will then feel they're more actively involved and having a say in what these projects actually look like, whether they have an ownership stake or not, but at least that they feel they have been given the chance to input on it. So so there's a lot of the policymakers, the sustainable energy communities have a major role as well. Our findings say they're very good in terms of promoting positive attitudes to the environment and wind energy, and Jean-Pierre's results there also showed that there's evidence of that, and we find evidence of that as well. But I suppose it's on a project by project basis. You kind of need to look at this, and it's coming down to the needs of individual communities. And that's why I think hiring some form of intermediaries within these communities to bring some of these projects off the ground, to manage some sort of that type of engagement process with the SECs, with the local developers, with the community, and whether it be wind or solar or whatever type of project, that maybe we might then get some more acceptance when people feel they can you know, have involvement in the design of these projects overall, you know. So I think it's not just communities and developers. I think it's wider in terms of trying to bring this about. Yeah,
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Anybody like to add? Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, Gary. Yeah, please.
Well, just to say what's worked well for us in our project is the fact we've got 10 partners, mostly government departments and state agencies. So a lot of the actors that are sometimes hard to get a hold of because they're, you know, busy and doing many different things are integrated as partners in the project. So they're already there. And what we are missing then is the people on the ground, the communities, who are the most important of all. But then we would see that as our role as being the intermediary between the government agencies and many of them, and kind of taking all their thoughts, filtering them into a coherent kind of policy or an action plan, and then taking in all the lessons engagement from the community end, and then coming up with solutions that work for both. So we found that works really well. There was some kickback at the beginning from some communities who felt they weren't involved enough in the design of the project to start with. So that's very important that when you bring in community engagement as early as possible, even, you know, far before something gets funded, that they're brought in. But having the remit for complementary funding, so we can have projects within our project, communities now see that it's an opportunity to come to us. Oh, we've got an idea. Can you help us? You have access to all these departments, and we say yeah. So we've been very successful in working with communities, bringing in additional projects there. So.
Yeah, great. And I guess Jean-Pierre and Noreen's research show that actually there's a good lot of acceptance on the ground. Jean-Pierre, were you surprised by the results of the survey?
Yeah, I was actually. Yeah, I guess there's often when you speak to civil servants or planners or so on, you do often get a little bit of a bias where when you do have loud minorities, people tend to overestimate how big opposition is. But it's always important to get a bit more nuanced on why and who they are and why. But it also kind of poses an interesting question to kind of where government allocates resources. So in the case of RES, like we said, the payment to neighbours and communities are going to impose a cost of several kind of 100 million euros onto electricity consumers. Is this potentially a kind of quite expensive way to pay for maybe some shortcomings in the planning process or siting approaches or something like that? Or is there maybe kind of better value for money if we already seem to have a high level of support for renewables in principle, both from communities around the projects and more generally?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And Noreen, I guess from your takeaways, and it's more than financial, I suppose. Yeah, were there any particular kind of conclusions from this that really struck you?
Yeah, I think it's the national survey is really a kind of good news result for the sector, because we find that the general public, the majority of them are really positive about wind energy. They're really willing to give up a personal benefit that was offered in the choice experiment to support reductions in intermittency, either through demand side management, storage, particularly trade. That was seen as one of the easiest ways to reduce intermittency. And really, we find very strong support for the provision of benefits and engagement with local communities, with people, again, willing to give up personal benefit to support local communities. And you have a very small minority in the result that have reservations, and those reservations are based on, you know, just concerns about energy infrastructure development, how battery storage works, how, you know, demand side management works, grid expansion, you know, things that have solutions that aren't just based on, well, I don't like it and that's the end of it. There are solutions to these, but yeah, the vast majority are quite positive. Yeah, it's good.
Okay. That's fantastic. And look, we haven't had time to go through all the questions, but just so the audience know, I will relay the questions to the particular participants and they can answer in the chat. Okay, we are going to be moving to our next sprint now. So thank you so much to all of you, and yeah, enjoy the rest of the day.
Thank you.
Welcome back to the second round of our research sprint. First up, we have Dr. Niall Dunphy, and he's from UCC, and he'll be talking about his project, A Contested Space, Citizenship in the Energy Transition. Thanks, Niall. Sorry, we seem to have some trouble now hearing you.
Thank you very much, and thank you, Kerry, for the introduction. As Kerry mentioned, I'm going to speak today on the topic of contested space, citizenship in the energy transition. And it's a combination of a number of projects that we're undertaking that are funded by SEAI in the context of a wider research program in the area of people's relationship with energy. And specifically today, I'm going to talk about some insights that have emerged from 3 projects, which are Emerging in 2050, Energy Polities, and Crowd Power. So I suppose it's fair to say that energy system has been traditionally seen through an almost entirely technocentric lens, and there has been a reluctance, among some at least, to acknowledge its intrinsic social dimension. So energy, as we all know, is a socio-technical system, and indeed the social part of that, many would argue, is just as complex, if not more complex, than the technical dimension. So the 3 projects I'm going to talk about are looking at different aspects of people's relationship with energy. The Imagining 2050, and it has been mentioned already by Inference, and it will be mentioned, I know, later today by other speakers, was a very interesting project which looked at enabling dialogue and co-designing ways of I suppose pathways towards a more climate resilient Ireland, working with communities and designing new engagement techniques and approaches, and Energy Polities then looked at a different thing, and looked at social mobilization around energy, a collective action around energy, and some of the horror stories we've had with energy infrastructure, I suppose, are what we looked at here, and why the socio-political context led those particular projects to create such opposition in different sectors. And then the third project that's going to feed into these insights is called Crowd Power, and it concerns support tools and supports for community renewable energy. So energy citizenship is a term that has increasing currency, and as we move towards more sustainable modes of consumption and production of energy. However, not all perspectives of what energy citizenship is or could be are equally supported by the power holders. I suppose those that are more acceptable are those that do not threaten the status quo, maybe active consumerism or prosumerism. But once we start to step out of those lanes, we get slapped back down again. And sometimes the expressions of energy citizenship which challenge incumbents or government policy are not so welcomed. And indeed, those forms of expressions of energy citizenships the citizens are often vilified or ignored by those who have the power. So emerging from the work that we've done, we've identified a number of different expressions of energy citizenship, and I would just mention a few of them here today. We have the passive consumer. I suppose this is the traditional approach where we were simply just passive recipients of energy. We were very glad to receive this technical marvel into our homes. We could turn on light at the flick of a switch, but it was a marvelous thing altogether. As we became more sophisticated, I suppose, and particularly on foot of the energy crisis in the past, we were encouraged to become more active consumers. We were encouraged to use our purchasing power to influence the market in certain directions. And I suppose within this, there was a certain almost a transfer responsibility from again, those with power towards as individuals to do something to change what needs to be changed. There's a certain perception then that that energy citizens need to be the good citizen, that we, the great unwashed, simply need to be educated and informed, and then we'll do the right thing, as defined by those who hold the power. Constitutionalists then are those for whom everything is about regulations and about enforcing their legal rights and really, very strictly line by line understanding of the law. And we have then producers who either individually or collectively with others are involved in the production of energy. And then we have probably what is the more controversial one, which are the challengers, those who engage in public debates, organises and protests to promote alternative perspectives in the energy system. And each of these in their own way are expressions of energy citizenship and are equally valid in how people wish to influence the energy system as it evolves. So just some takeaways from the work we've done in these 3 projects, and indeed, as I said, in other projects. Citizens very much feel locked out of decision making, and I'm very glad to see from previous speakers that there is an acknowledgement of this, and that there is growing moves towards incorporating them to some extent, at least, into this, and also locked into an energy system that actively limits their individual agency. I'm also very much aware that a lot of the ways in which we as citizens are encouraged to engage in the energy system is very much on economic terms. And there's a notable classism which is explicit in many of these. Citizens are assumed to have levels of resources and agencies that simply many do not have. So mechanisms and approaches are required to empower citizens, both individually and collectively, to engage with and just as importantly, to become involved in the energy system on their own terms. One size does not fit all. There should be less consultation, that's that really horrible word, and more dialogue. And it's that two-way communication is important. Again, I was very heartened to hear the word listening mentioned earlier by other speakers. So there's a need for more deliberative local dialogues around the generation and the use of energy. And as I said, listening is important. So citizens need to be acknowledged, I would argue, as legitimate partners and potentially leaders, and this is often overlooked, in both policy development on energy and in the development of energy projects themselves. So the role of the energy citizen, or the role of the citizen in the energy domain, remains very much contested. There is a need for further consideration on how our visions of energy citizenship, and indeed energy democracy, can better serve those energy citizens who are often marginalized by incumbent power holders. And I include in this dispossessed, for example. So around the world, not just Ireland, but we have indigenous people and other marginalized groups from whom energy resources have been unjustly taken. We have those who are excluded, those prevented from connecting to energy grids due to socio-political and economic reasons. And then the energy vulnerable, those for whom affordability of energy is an issue and who are at risk of energy poverty. Obviously, as we mentioned already, and as we know, though all too well aware, this is an increasing problem here in Ireland also. So yeah, for more information on our projects and any of this, our website is there, and you can contact me on that email address. Thank you, Gary. I think that's the 7 minutes.
Perfect. Many thanks, Niall. Okay, now next up is Katie Harrington from Codima, and she'll be talking about her project Zero Together towards a cleaner, healthier Dublin. Thanks, Katie.
There we go. Perfect. I'm just going to share my screen. So hopefully you can see my slides there and hear me. Great stuff. Yeah, so good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much, Kerry. Delighted to be here. So just to briefly introduce myself, my name is Katie Harrington. I'm the Energy and Climate Awareness Officer with Codima. So for those of you that may not be totally familiar with our work, we are Dublin's energy agency. We're a not-for-profit and we work on behalf of the 4 Dublin local authorities. And our mission is to accelerate Dublin's low carbon transition through innovative local level energy and climate change research, planning, engagement and project delivery, really in order to mitigate the effects of climate change and improve the lives of citizens. So for the next, I think, 6.5 minutes now, I'm going to introduce you to a unique and ambitious initiative called Zero Together. So Zero Together is an initiative with the ultimate aim of creating and supporting the delivery of a vision and a strategy for the whole of Dublin to ensure that we meet our 2030 and 2050 emission reduction targets. And really Zero Together promotes a regional approach to the energy transition that is not only ambitious but inclusive. And really the genesis of Zero Together is very much grounded in evidence. So through our own research and evidence base in Codema, we actually discovered that the public sector are only responsible for 5% of greenhouse gas emissions across Dublin. And if we really mean what we say in terms of our mission of accelerating Dublin's energy transition, then we needed to start looking beyond the council's remit and really build a vision and a strategy for the whole of Dublin, addressing that remaining 95% of emissions, and in doing so ensuring that we include the people of Dublin in the process. So to do this, we looked to Europe and we secured $250,000 in funding to get started. So the EU Horizon 2020 project supporting this is called Tomorrow, and would you believe that's actually an acronym? And this project has connected us with not only 5 other pilot cities with the same mission, but the Dutch Research Institute of Transitions, meaning that Zero Together is grounded in a field of research known as transition management. And according to Drift, transition management is a process-oriented and participatory steering philosophy that enables social learning through iterations between collective problem structuring, vision development, coalition building, and experimenting and monitoring. And really that definition is just a collection of words until it becomes something like Zero Together. So based on the transition management approach, Zero Together is grounded in 3 elements, and it's these 3 pieces of the puzzle that we believe could impact and inform policy and ensure that the initiative is inclusive. And the first piece being that the process is grounded in an evidence base and the best available science. Secondly, we're committed to planning and implementing best practice public participation and engagement. And then thirdly, collaboration from a range of sectors across Dublin. So looking at these pillars in a little more detail and how they could impact and inform policies. So one evidence base that is very much directing and supporting the Zero Together process is our Dublin Region Energy Master Plan that was published in April of this year. This 3-year study, which was actually funded by the SCAI through their RD&D call, is the first of its kind to be carried out for any city or town in Ireland. And essentially it identifies the most realistic evidence-based solutions to reduce emissions related to heat, electricity, transport and buildings in Dublin. And what is particularly unique about this piece of work is that these pathways and solutions are based on Dublin's unique spatial energy characteristics, which arguably are often overlooked when examining low carbon pathways at a national level. And the master plan also brings together national government plans and policies to show the impact that they'll have on Dublin, specifically demonstrating that kind of need and impact of a regional approach to the energy transition. So the final report is actually over 200 pages, and I don't have time to go into key figures, but I've included a few of those on the screen there, and I'd be happy to share a link with anyone who'd like to read our summary or our full report. And the second pillar of our Zero Together initiative is public participation and engagement. So this time last year, we launched a Zero Together survey looking for the public's views on how best to move Dublin away from fossil fuels. And we received an overwhelming response. We received 1,000 responses to this survey. And a few insights that really stood out to us were around trust or lack thereof, self-efficacy and engagement. And I think the last 2 points there on the screen are particularly important to this idea of a regional approach to the energy transition. So 71% of respondents said that they feel that their views and concerns are rarely or never taken into account in relation to how we use or produce energy in Dublin. And then when asked how they'd like to be engaged going forward, nearly 70% of respondents said they'd like to be able to deliberate, propose and vote on recommendations that would be presented to local and national government, really demonstrating an appetite to be engaged through these kind of local deliberative processes. Such as what Niall was speaking about in his presentation. So for example, conducting a mini public on Dublin's energy transition would be an example of that. And from this insight, we actually, in Codema, we've developed an implementation plan to conduct a local mini public on Dublin's energy transition. And then finally, a core element of transition management as determined by DRIFT is the creation of a transition team, which is essentially a group of motivated change agents from a diverse range of sectors, such as academia, community groups, business, transport, local authorities, to actually come together in one room and build consensus on a shared vision and strategy for Dublin's energy transition. So we recruited a transition team last year, and this team of over 24 people have been working together for the past 10 months on this goal of building a shared vision and a strategy for Dublin. And really the creation and collaboration of a transition team is in ways an attempt at redefining leadership. We're attempting to inform and influence policy and wider society from the middle out, like really pushing beyond those hierarchical structures. And really by bringing together local actors from across different sectors, we're firstly providing the space and time to build consensus, and secondly, we're creating a network of influence, so that kind of unified and coherent voice. And then finally, in terms of the question around our vision for the research required to enable and support societal transformation, this is a non-exhaustive list of areas that we think would benefit from research and, more importantly, collaboration, all the way from a just transition in Dublin, looking at who are the most affected groups and how to reach and engage them, to behavioural research around district heating adoption and active travel. And overall in CODEMA, we believe there isn't this kind of one-size-fits-all approach to the energy transition, but really by understanding what is required at a local and regional level in terms of an evidence-based local engagement and collaboration, policy and the energy transition can be more inclusive and reflective of local and regional needs and experience. So that is me. If anything resonated, I suppose, in what I've spoken about today, please feel free to get in touch. My email is there on the screen. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Katie. That was great. Okay, on to our third sprint. We'll have Dr. Brian Caulfield from Trinity College Dublin talking about his project, the acronym TRACT, but a transport behaviour change trials. Thank you, Brian.
Okay, great. Thank you very much, and good afternoon, everybody. So the research that I'm going to talk about hasn't started yet. However, it's a very exciting project that we were very lucky enough to get funded by SEAI and the Department of Transport. Listening to all the talk this morning around how we transition into a low carbon society, it's really heartening to hear that behavioral change is kind of at the heart of what everybody is starting to talk about, and that the engineering solutions and what models are telling us to do, they're all well and good, but unless we get the hearts and minds behind what we want to do, it's going to be very difficult. So what TRACT does, it builds upon a number of other research projects that we've either finished or have ongoing here in my research group here in Trinity, and it looks at two very specific elements. So the project itself is going to run for 3 years, and it's just kicked off. I think at the heart of perhaps why we won the project, but at the heart of it is that it's truly interdisciplinary. So there are academics here in the School of Engineering, in computer science and statistics and psychology, all involved in this project, which I think is key for the type of research that we're going to do. The research is funding 4 postdoctoral research fellows. 2 of them will be based with me and my team here in engineering. There will be 1 in computer science in the ADAPT Centre, and then 1 in psychology. So as I said, it's a truly interdisciplinary team that we have. The project has a number of really good industry partners. And again, this is kind of, I suppose, key to achieving what we want to do in the project. But the main kind of objective of it is to kind of marry the psychology and the engineering together to see if we can actually enact behavioral change over the period of the project. So the project has 2 different aspects. The first one is going to be a mobility hub. And I'm sure a lot of you have heard of these mobility hubs, and it's something that's become very popular. I think this is one of the key ways in which we're going to be able to decarbonize transport, whereby you go to an area that has access to electric cars, bikes, scooters, eventually buses, e-cargo bikes, all of these different low carbon modes of transport. And by having something like this nearby, I suppose it facilitates or enables you to wean yourself off owning your private car. So in the first year of the project, we're going to be identifying the best location for our mobility hub. We've got partners in Bleeper and in Yuko with Toyota that are going to provide us the vehicles at the mobility hub. And over the lifetime of the project, which I should move on to, we're going to be testing a number of different technologies and a number of different kind of psychological tools to see how the trial is working. So this trial, this is the first of 2 trials, and this is going to run for 18 months. And the project team will look at each of the different mobility options that are provided to the users. One of the key things is that we're going to be using personalization through the app. So the app will be given to people that live nearby the mobility hub. And a key thing behind this is that we're going to be tailoring suggestions to each individual. One of the main reasons why we're in the kind of trouble we're in terms of transport, and the chair of the Climate Change Advisory Council mentioned this quite eloquently this morning, is that, you know, it's behavior. It's getting people to change their behavior, and that's what this is going to do. So it's going to tailor the message. There isn't, you can't bash people over the head with, you know, congestion charge or whatever it is and make them and expect them to change. This is something that's going to be a bit more nuanced, and it's going to give them viable alternatives to their car. And what we really want to see then is people selling their car and getting rid of it. We're going to have, it's going to have a cross-sectional approach in that we're going to have inputs from a number of different fields in terms of changing transport behavior. My colleagues here in psychology are going to be using a number of different kind of nudging tools. The trial runs for 18 months, so we've got a good set of time to see what's working, what's not working, and then the learnings from this mobility hub could be used at any of the other mobility hubs that will no doubt pop up during our project. Also, we're going to be looking at mixed modes, and there, I suppose, looking at the ways in which people can change between each of the different modes. It's not that we're saying that this is for you every day. One of the things that I say quite a bit is that whataboutery is the biggest enemy of transport policy. And I'm not saying this fits everybody, but if it fits, you know, 50–60% of the people within the area that we're looking at, you know, that's something that could be a success. I'm convinced that these mobility hubs within Dublin would work very well, and even outside of Dublin, I think that this type of mobility option is something that is could be transformative, I think, across the island. The second trial is on electric cars, and it's going to be basically primarily based around an app. So there, at the first side of the slide, there are a number of inputs, and these inputs are the locations of charging stations, using GPS tracking on the app as well. So to monitor how people are using their current car. So the idea of the app is that you don't have an electric car, but you're thinking about changing over. And I suppose this app is designed to, you know, show you what could happen if you did have an electric car. So the app will monitor people as they drive their petrol or diesel car. It will show them how often they would have to charge. It will show them, you know, how where they would charge, etc. And one of the key things here is that we're looking at taxis in terms of the user groups. The user groups that will use the app, taxi drivers are one of the biggest ones. I'll talk about them in a few minutes. And FreeNow are one of our partners, as are EasyGo, Transpoco, and Nissan, are all partners in this part of the app. So the outputs will be this tailored, personalized information to users. And it's not just to certain groups, it's going to be for everybody. So anybody that's on the call within the next 11 to 12 months, this app will be out there, and we're encouraging as many people as possible to use it. So Nissan Ireland will be promoting this app at each of their 42 dealerships across Ireland. And traditionally, Nissan is one of the largest sellers of electric vehicles in Ireland. So when people come into the showroom and they're thinking about it or thinking about buying a second-hand EV, they could trial this for a week or so and to see what their changes might be. I think taxis are a key thing to decarbonise or to electrify at least as quickly as possible. And FreeNow have been fantastic in this project to date. And when the app is ready, we will be pushing it out to 14,000 taxi drivers across the island. And again, if we can decarbonize one taxi, that's like decarbonizing 4 normal cars. So, you know, the bang for your buck of an electric taxi is huge. The app will be across common platforms. We're hoping to get at least 10,000 users, so we'll be banging the drum to get people out there using it. And one of the key things is the people that are not enabled currently to buy an electric car, if you don't have a driveway or living in rural Ireland, it's data on those that we want. And we want to figure out why it is that you're not using or you're not thinking about getting an electric car. Users will receive personalized information. So when they finish using the app, there'll be a survey. We'll be asking them what were the constraints, what they liked, what they didn't like, and what are the barriers. And I think the barriers will be very important for individuals, no matter where they are in the country, but also say for the taxi drivers, what are the barriers to them being able to switch over to an electric vehicle. It will give them back information on how they, how much money they would save, how often they would charge, and what the payback period is of whatever electric vehicle that they decide to buy. It won't be just new electric vehicles. We'll also look at secondhand electric vehicles, because I think one of the key things around electric vehicles is that and the provision of them is that we don't widen the gap between those that can and those that can't, and that, this eases towards just transition. The data that will be collected will provide a large, geographically dispersed representation of a number of different use cases. And I think this will be vital to informing both SEAI and the department as to how they can go forward and how they could maybe tailor different policies to different individuals. There's a couple of things here that are quite boring, so I'm not going to spend any time on it around timelines and projects and all that kind of stuff. Other than to say, it's a very, very exciting project for us here in Trinity. There's my details. There's a QR code there. If you want to scan, you can find my profile. If you've got questions, if you want to be part of the trial, hopefully next year or the year after, when hopefully I'm invited back to present at the conference and it's in person, that will be showing you some of the results. But watch out for this app. This is the one that everybody can participate in, but the mobility hub, I suppose, is very much depending upon where we decide to locate it. And I'm not sure how I did there on time. Sorry.
Thank you very much, Brian. Project planning is not at all boring. It's essential. Okay, now our final researcher is Dr. Roisin Moriarty, also from UCC, and she's part of the EPA's 5-year climate research assessment report. Thank you, Roisin.
Sorry, I need to unmute myself first. Here we go. So thank you, Kerry, and good afternoon, everybody. I'm going to talk about the 5-year assessment of climate research, how it can inform policy and give our vision of some of the research required to deliver Ireland's energy revolution. So the 5-year assessment of climate research is a comprehensive and Ireland-focused State of the Scientific Knowledge report. It's an assessment and synthesis of research findings, and it will be performed every 5 years. And its primary aim is to identify research gaps that inform research investment and assist in prioritizing research topics. So the report is divided into 4 volumes. Volume 1 is all about the physical science. Volume 2 is about mitigation. Volume 3 is about adaptation, and then Volume 4 that I'll present today is about realizing the benefits of transition and transformation. And here we explore how we get from the ambition we have in Ireland around climate change and climate action, how we get to implementation. And in Volume 4, it's about mitigation and adaptation, but I think most importantly about how we do that quickly. So this is a very snap overview of Volume 4. And in order to kind of address today's central question is how do we enable and support societal transformation that will help us in our energy revolution? So there are two very broad sections in volume 4. The first section is called multiple transformations. And here we look at how we change different areas of society in Ireland, but in a cross-cutting nature. So we look at landscapes, settlements, livelihoods, and lifestyles. And then in the second part of the volume, we look at enabling transformation. And enabling transformation, we look at kind of 3 key levers: governance, finance, and people. And we know that the technological transformation is not happening quickly enough. And we know that we need to have a second part that is societal transformation alongside technical innovation around how we use energy. So I'm going to focus in on people here, as I think this is an enabler where we have only begun to realize its potential. And it's also important to realize that people don't just enable climate action and transition. Their actions, including climate activism and climate litigation, and we've seen this in Ireland already, have acted as catalysts for moving climate action up the political agenda and getting decisions around climate change made faster. Okay, so how will volume 4 inform policy? Well, it's a little bit early for me to talk about this in any great detail, as we're still in the process of drafting volume 4, but I can give you an idea of where we're headed. So our national climate objective frames the challenge as a transition, and volume 4 takes the transition and puts it in the context of the urgent transformational change required, and how we create or empower a society that can enable and catalyze the rapid actions necessary to combat climate change. The level of change, the level of effort necessary to make the change is difficult to imagine. Even for all of the people that work in the climate and energy space, the challenge is so huge. So decision makers, like we've heard earlier today, are beginning to think about transformational change. So the work has started, but it must accelerate and embrace the benefits and opportunities that come along with this change. So volume 4 will have the wider research community thinking about transformational change, discussing it, researching it, doing it, because there's some of this that we just have to learn by doing, adapting, and improving as we go along. So this work will give policymakers an evidence base, and I think more importantly, the confidence to be stronger and to help direct people, households, communities, and businesses to make the radical changes necessary. Okay. So what is the essential research required to transform society and the energy system? Well, we know the scale of the challenge is enormous. We need to mobilize skill and talent, but also the diversity of knowledge and know-how out there. So if we want to accelerate action around planning for energy projects, major transport infrastructure projects, grey, green and blue adaptation projects, for example, then transforming how we do engagement is essential. And it's really great to hear all the insights that have been presented so far in the conference today around this. So the process is going to have to meet people, lots of different people. And with that, there is a risk of the more people that get involved in the process, that it might slow down. So we have research in Ireland that shows that when people, especially those who belong to marginalised and vulnerable communities, are involved in the process, they are more accepting of the outcomes. One, because they feel heard, and two, because their involvement in the process actually increases their level of trust in that process. And this may speed up decision-making. So that's one thing. But then the good news, like we're hearing today, is that we're already doing the research in Ireland. And it's clear from the research that both Niall and Katie and Brian have presented, and others here today, that this work is ongoing. But what Volume 4 will do will help to signpost where this work needs to go in the future. And I think it's really important to acknowledge that research is not enough. These initiatives need supportive policy intervention and the provision of resources to local communities to ensure that this level of engagement and participation can be rolled out in every community across Ireland. Okay, and for my final slide, just a few words about the delivery of Volume 4. We plan to publish Volume 4 after an expert review in August 2023. It will have a summary for policymakers included. And then after Volume 4, there will be a synthesis report at some point in autumn 2023. This synthesis report will, well, we envisage that it will be an accessible and short document, making it easy for decision makers and all stakeholders to take on board the key messages of the entire report. So that's me, and thank you very much for your attention. And if there's any questions, you can just email me there on my details. I'm looking forward to all the questions.
Thank you so much, Roisin, and thank you to all of you for those presentations. It's not easy to get it down to 7 minutes. Some quick questions, but again, like the previous session, I'll relay any of the questions that we don't manage to get to. I guess there's a lot of emphasis on the regional or the individual, and there's a lot of self-motivation there. What would be, from your research, what would be the advice for policymakers to achieve the optimal spread of renewable energy generation across Ireland, mindful that we need to bring the people with us, and it's not down to individuals only. Anybody would like to pick that one up? Katie, I guess you were talking about the regional approach. What would be the interplay with national?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not an engineer, so I'm really just speaking from kind of the participatory piece, but I think the interplay kind of with national and the reason why we're kind of so focused on the regional approach is that even just based on our energy master plan, we're able to see that there's very specific requirements for Dublin versus the rest of the country. So I think a key example of that would be, you know, national policy, or even just like kind of targets around heat pumps. From our master plan, we're able to see that actually the most cost optimal kind of pathway is district heating, and even Minister Eamon Ryan was speaking about that this morning. So I think you know, taking that kind of regional approach allows you to actually address local requirements and local needs. So that's pretty much where we're kind of focusing our attention on.
Yeah, thank you. Anybody like to add? I guess building on that, we've had a question starting with County Kerry provides approximately 20% of all wind energy in Ireland, and in recent times there's been some backlash by the communities in North Kerry against further wind turbines, and this has been overridden by An Bord Pleanála. So the question is, would it not be fair that just transition should also include a provision for just distribution of renewable energy across the country? Niall, perhaps something to add to that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it goes back to something that Gary Goggins mentioned earlier, that at the planning stage, we need to involve people and communities, not just individuals, but communities, allow people to collectivize as well. We do need a just transition, and a just transition is not just about workers' rights, it is including that, but it's also about, as we see what they're doing in Mayo and Sligo, it's about retrofitting homes, so decarbonizing from the other end, so to speak. It's about distribution of the gains that we get from the renewables, such as I've suggested there. So there's, it should be all up for discussion, but it needs to be done in a very much a collaborative way. And an overly developer-led energy system is not going to deliver that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Brian, we heard in other speeches about, or other talks about energy democracy, climate action democracy, addressing marginalized citizens. So do you see any barriers to engage in your research coming up?
Well, hopefully not. Hopefully everyone's going to be, I've already seen 2 emails come in that people want to engage in it. And I think that maybe the barriers are that people are being asked to do everything really quickly, and the cost of that is going to be huge. I think perhaps maybe to go back to even the previous question, I think we need a bit of a more nuanced way in which we look at policy in this country when it comes to climate action, that, you know, not one size fits all. You know, electric cars in Dublin are, to be honest, a waste, because there's too much, there's enough public transport to use and other modes of transport. Whereas in rural Ireland, that's where they're needed, where people are traveling longer distances. So, you know, there are barriers. And I think, you know, I think the keynote speaker this morning, who was amazing, I think kind of put it really well in that, you know, we need to get the proper, correct information out there and not disenfranchise people to what these barriers are. But people are hearing information from so many different angles at the moment as to what's the best thing to do. And SEAI have a great voice in this, in terms of leading people to, you know, what the optimal solutions are.
Yeah, great, thank you. And Roisin, you mentioned this kind of policy intervention to kind of get that enabling across Ireland. What do you think would be, yeah, low-hanging fruit in this area?
I think, well, on one level, when we kind of talk about individuals or communities, we maybe think of discrete entities, but once you get communities acting, they can also kind of team up together. So from, you know, but we need to get it started. And I think if you look at what they've been doing in Dingle, you know, without that supportive policy and without resources, it's just not possible to do it in other communities. So I think at a national level, they can look at policy in that regard. They can look at funding. I mean, we've heard from wonderful speakers today who are talking about, you know, how do we get to people? How do we support them? How do we make this easier for them? So I think there is just, again, at a national level, at a policy level, policy coherence and just making things work for those people and those communities, and then allowing them also to come together. And, you know, all that knowledge and know-how will be shared across Ireland as well. So we just need to enable all of that for a start.
Yeah, absolutely. And that was perfect final words for the research sprint. So listen, thank you to all of you on here on the panel, but also thank you to everybody else for watching the research sprint. And I hope you enjoyed it and enjoy your lunch, and we'll see you in an hour. Okay, thanks very much. Bye.